Hi everybody. Hope you can hear me out there. Yeah, so welcome to my first Orchestration live Q&A. I'm seeing some people line up here in the in my stream. Very, very cool. There's a couple dozen people starting already. Okay, so super. This is really exciting. Really fun. So I don't see any questions in the stream yet, but let me just introduce what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to answer some questions that are that people are asking. Just anything general to do with orchestration. If you have a question that's about a specific score, I would have to go look it up, and that kind of would take too much time. But if you have something general to ask about, like, say, how about different instruments work, or combinations of instruments, or what are some good suggestions if you have a specific problem, that would be perfect for me to answer. Okay, now I've got one question. This is a bit of a skull buster. Somebody emailed me a little while ago, and they asked me, here's their question. This is from J.J. Wilmore. And he asks, in going fluently between tonal centers, shifting the feel of key briefly, what is a good practice to know if and when you should change the key signature? And then he asks, if you do not change the key signature and you're using multiple instruments, what's a good way to make your sharps and flats consistent in orchestration so that the overall score is consistent? Okay, so kind of two questions and two answers. My first answer is you just have to trust your musicians that they will understand the key change, okay? That they won't get bogged down if you are in A major and then you suddenly have to play a passage in B flat. If it's just a few bars and then you go back to A major, it's better just to put in your naturals and your flats and then go back, because they'll understand it. Now the answer to the second question would be why don't you just leave out all the key signatures, which is becoming more and more common, especially in film music. Okay, so that would be my answer there. Now I'm going to just check my live stream here. So two questions. One is, what is your opinion on Franz Liszt as an orchestrator? Okay. I would say that I think he opened a lot of doors. He came along at a really convenient time, sort of between Berlioz and Wagner, and he did some experimentation, and I think we should give him credit for that. That doesn't mean he was a great orchestrator, but I think that he wanted to be one, and he explored the process. And I think that some of his pieces are really beautifully orchestrated, but maybe might need a little bit of editing. And generally that's what conductors tend to do. They tend to adjust things here and there. So anyway, that would be my opinion of Franz Liszt. Okay, how do you recommend conducting in 5/4? Okay, like this. Right? Right, da 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 dun 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 da 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 dun 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 da 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 dun 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 dun. Okay, if it's really slow 5/4, right, you can beat out every beat. But I'm not a conductor; I'm just a composer. Okay, but I know enough about conducting to anticipate what the conductor will need. All right. How do I feel about having the drum set, electric bass, and electric guitar in the symphony orchestra? I am a crossover orchestrator. I'll give you a couple of tips. Okay, first one is make sure that your sound person is really in control of the bass and does not overdo the bass, because the bass will basically just kill the orchestra. That's the first one. If you ever notice somebody recording a symphonic / crossover with rock type of performance, and they just have their little cell phone recording it you'll notice that all you can hear is the bass. You can't even hear the orchestra. And there's something similar going on there with the audience's ears, not quite as pronounced. They might have a little bit more in the mix, but yeah, so just control the bass. And don't put in too much rhythm guitar because that just kills the mid-range. You know, just try to have rhythm guitar on less distorted sounds, more kind of a natural acoustic or funk type of sound. And if the mix is done really well, there are some people who are really, really great at it. Here in New Zealand, we have some of the best crossover technicians ever. So yeah, so I've learned from them, and I've learned from just basically producing a couple concerts like that. The range of the oboe is very versatile. Which could you explain how to use the oboe? Well, that would take a really long time, but that's a good bridge to something that I did not talk about at the beginning. I'm going to preview two things for you today, two upcoming bits of educational resources that I'm going to be releasing this year. One of which is the 103, the Orchestration 103 Wind Instruments course, and that explains a lot of what you need to understand to score for the oboe. Of course, you could always get a book like this. There's a really good series, the Yehudi Menuhin series, and this is a fairly good book. This is the oboist's perspective. It's written by a couple of fantastic, great pro oboe players. And this taught me a lot. Also, working with oboists taught me a lot. I'm going to be playing an excerpt from the 103 Wind Instruments course that's going to talk about scoring for English horn, which is closely related. But I think I would just take half an hour if I were to explain everything about oboe. Okay, so that's one of the resources that I'm going to be covering. The other one is the 100 More Orchestration Tips book, which I hope to release in August. I pretty much think I can do it. It's gonna be some heavy work, but I think I can do that. So, so let's go back here. Yeah, Puccini al Ponticello. Yeah, so sul Ponticello is the usual marking for that. So, you know, close to the bridge, as somebody already mentioned. And the opposite of that is sul tastiera or sul tasto, so that's over the fingerboard, where you get sort of a softer sound. Yeah, so do you have any score recommendations for studying unconventional Romantic era and Classical era harmony? Okay, so depends on what you mean about unconventional, all right, because the Romantics, especially, you know, I mean, sometimes we sort of think of guys like Strauss and Mahler as being kind of conventional and soupy and stuff like that. But, you know, the truth is that they were pushing harmony all the time in directions that were not the same direction as Schoenberg. But they were definitely pushing it in all sorts of strange directions. And, you know, even in composers who we might consider to be very conventional, like Massenet and Saint-Saëns, they were playing around with harmony all the time too. So I think you just have to you have to decide what you mean by unconventional and then follow that. It's a little too much for me to get into at this point, but I would say you need to listen to more, I would say, Bruckner, Strauss, Mahler, Scriabin especially, okay, who's got a certain chromatic approach where he just really moves things around. I would say the Poem of Ecstasy would be a great place to start. Early Rachmaninoff is great, like The Isle of the Dead and his The Miserly Night, I think is the name of his small operetta. It's got just fantastic. It's kind of a bridge between Tchaikovsky, Scriabin, Glazunov, a lot of other people who Rachmaninoff was learning from at that time. When orchestrating a crossover piece, how do you notate swing for classically trained musicians? It's really simple. Most classically trained musicians right now were brought up on jazz. They know what they're doing, and if not, they've been hired for a lot of gigs where they need to understand swing. You just notate the swing in just regular pairs of eighth notes, and then you just write swing above it. Okay, or you could do the metric modulation text in Sibelius has got it, and I think Finale's got it as well. you just have, you show the two pairs and then you show the triplet pair, right? So anyways, too much to go into right now, but that's how you would do it. Somebody suggested Verklärte Nacht. Yeah, I mean, in a sense, Schoenberg's early work was like late romantic in a very cosmic sense. Somebody mentions 100 more orchestration tips. I'd like to patron that one. What I'm going to be doing, I'll have a big announcement about this next month or something like that. I've got a ton of big announcements coming up, but I can't give it all away. But what I will be doing is I will be putting the book will be available for people on Patreon who are donating at a certain level, okay? And also, if people they don't want to deal with Patreon or whatever, and that's totally fine. I never question anybody for coming in, going out, whatever. I don't care. Just, if you can support everybody in the community by helping fund the videos, I'm so appreciative. And if you just want to get a book, that's cool too. So I'm probably going to start a reservation page on Indiegogo, where basically, just for, you can get it, you can order, you can just save your copy, right? So just pledge the certain amount, and I'll have a minimum 100 copies, and then just everybody can just order as many as they like for probably just a discount from what the normal price of the previous book was. So I don't want to get into that. Let's talk about orchestration questions. What's my preference in orchestrating in software, Finale or Sibelius? I've talked about this before. Very, very quick story. At the beginning of I think what I feel is the modern era of notation software really kind of started towards the end of the 90s and beginning of the 2000s. And it had to do not so much with the software, which people have been working on for years, Finale and Sibelius, but it had to do with computers. The iMac came out, and also PCs were catching up with the iMac and all this other stuff. Very easy to get control of kinds of interfaces were really in demand, and that is when I think, I got on the bandwagon with that year 2000, and I wasn't really happy with the process of Finale. I liked Sibelius because you saw everything in exactly where it was going to go from the moment you entered it. So that's why I got into Sibelius, and I found that it was a very easy process learning it and then sticking with it. Now, as far as Dorico is concerned, that I consider that to be the big three. I had a sort of a chance to learn Dorico at the end of last year, and when the time came, the instructional materials weren't completely organized yet, and there's absolutely no discredit to the team. It just was not something that they had taken care of yet. So I've still been, I've learned some things about it, but I just, until the next window opens up in my schedule, I cannot dedicate myself to it. But both I and macProVideo are dedicated to eventually releasing some workflow training about it. Okay, so it's coming soon, and I'll have a better perspective that I can give on Dorico at that time. Let's see. When orchestrating, okay, I talked about that one. Would you recommend starting composing strings versus for an orchestra? Yeah. In fact, I recommend starting learning how to score chamber music first. And if you look at my MOOC course, that basically starts with a violin. Okay, so you learn how to score for a violin, then a violin plus an accompanist, and then a cellist, and then a cellist plus a violinist plus a pianist to make piano trio and so on. I think it's better to build up your command of different voices interacting and to understand exactly how they work individually and as a group. So my first course was string instrument scoring, going all the way up to string quartet. And my next MOOC course, which is going to come in September of this year, will be about scoring for string orchestra. So I think that there is a certain logic to really having a command. If you cannot score for strings all by themselves effectively and beautifully, then I don't think you're ready to score for orchestra, unless you're coming from the band tradition, from another direction, and you have your command of winds and everything else. That's a different concern, or a brass band, or percussion ensemble. But I think that it really does. The strings are the heart of most what we understand as orchestration today. So yes. So, do you think a professional notation program is required if you want to orchestrate, or could you go with a free program like MuseScore? It just depends on what features, what kind of features do you want from your software. I don't know if MuseScore can extract parts and has the flexibility in terms of playback and editing and merging files and everything else. I think that if you just need something to just to put your notation onto a page, then, and you are completely in control of all those elements, then you could just do it in ink, but it's just the question is time spent. If MuseScore slows you down, if Notion and all the other ones, if they slow you down, if they make the process slow, that's a concern. Because I'm always trying to take the professional viewpoint, because I feel that the professional viewpoint is what gets the job done the quickest. And if the job gets done the quickest, I can take more work, and if I take more work, I can support my family, right? So it's just that logic. I could just write something down on a sheet of paper, and I could just compose with pen and ink, and that's kind of nice, because it just gives you time. It gives you time to sort of daydream and think and compose as you're writing. But I actually don't have time to do that anymore. I think that maybe notation software has spoiled me in a way that I can, work on things in my head and just get them organized, and pretty much by the time I get to the notation stage, it's all worked out, and just a few organizational and visual details need to be sorted. So yeah, I would say yes, I do think that if you have professional aspirations, you've got to use a higher level notation software. How do I know when and what notes to double in tutti chords? You just have got to do some score reading. That's the simple answer. Look at what tutis you enjoy, that you enjoy listening to, and then just take that page apart. And this is a really good exercise for you. Just write it all out on a couple of staves or on 4 staves. Just write down what the chord is, just the way that I diagram things on some of my tutti chord videos. And that will teach you everything that you need to know. Otherwise, I would have to spend a 2-hour lesson on explaining all that right now. But you just need to do some more score reading, and think that all of the different composers of the different periods scored tutis in a different way, right? So watch my videos on tutis, find the ones that you like, and score them out, all right? Or diagram them out. Where can I find advice on harmonic progressions for writing Baroque music? Probably, I would say, Gradasad Parnassum for the counterpoint, and then like some counterpoint texts talk about chord progressions. So it's a really, I would like to keep this more about orchestration, but there are some really great sources. I would say just maybe even Google that, what your question was, and I think you'll find some good stuff. When composing for orchestra, would you recommend using a piano reduction first? I think that it just depends on how you are doing it. You can do a piano reduction, you can do a 6-line stave, like upper and lower winds, upper and lower brass, and then strings, and then you can just have an extra staff for percussion if you need it, like tuned percussion or just different hits. So that's one way to do it. Another way, you can just use you can just sketch right onto your Sibelius score, but that can be like, just the vertical aspect of that can really confuse you. So if you really need everything condensed down, do what Mahler did. And, he would write out his whole, if you look at his sketches for his symphonies, it's just like, he starts off with like a staff, and then like he adds another staff underneath that, and then he's up to 3 staves, and then it just condenses back down to 2 staves, and so on. So, just start at one end of a sheet of paper and sketch if you like. Doing it, I'm not discounting working things out in pen. Sometimes that's faster and more natural for people. I don't, and I think you can even do that in a professional way where you're doing, you're just turning out a lot of stuff. But when it comes to actually scoring it on a piece of paper, I think for professional speed, the final leg of it really does have to be a high flight kind of composing. Can the double bass section be used better or more in the symphony orchestra? I mean, I think that it is used in a really great way in the symphony orchestra. I mean, if some composers compose beautiful, prominent parts for double bass or very imaginative parts for double bass. I answer some of these questions in 100 orchestration tips and in my Orchestration 101, the string section series. So yeah, I think it's being done in a really nice way already. You think music composition jobs will eventually get automated away? Many bots can already compose music indistinguishable from human music. Well, for that matter, could they automate producing jobs and just have a computer on set telling the actors what to do? And as far as that's concerned, why don't we just automate all writing jobs so everything that you read from the newspaper or magazine or a blog is just automated? The problem is with this kind of thinking that with music bots and stuff like that is that people see art as an end product, right? Here is art, right? That's what they think. They don't understand that art is this, right? Art is the process. It's the road. That's what makes you an artist, is sitting there and sweating and working on your piece and being inspired and going through the whole thing, and at the end of it, you're a different person, right? That's the whole point of art. The point of art is not to just leave behind a pretty-looking corpse in the form of your musical output or your artistic output. The point of it is that you went through it, right? And when we as listeners listen to your music or we look at your painting or whatever, when we, the audience, absorb that, we are absorbing the struggle that you went through and the humanity of it. So they can make bots all they want, but people are still going to be composing and needing to compose. That will never change and that will never go away. And the people who direct films and they want to work with a human being. Okay? I don't think you should worry about it. Okay, is an F tuba scored in transposing? Hang on, my chat is jumping around. Or is it scored, okay, orchestrally? No. Okay, there may be some differences for band scoring that I'm not aware of, or I'm not a big band scoring guy. What do you guys think about the guys of the second Viennese school as orchestrators? I think Schoenberg was brilliant. I think that they all, they have their own flavor. And look, if you want to hear the second Viennese school, just listen to, just listen to some of this, okay? A lot of the composers for Alfred Hitchcock and Gunsmoke and, a lot of 50s and 60s television, they're quoting Berg and Webern, little bits and pieces and fragments of orchestrating and arranging they're part of our culture. We don't realize it. A lot of people who wouldn't be caught dead at something that wasn't Tchaikovsky or Schubert or something easy to listen to for them. We're sitting there watching all of this really complex music on television for years and years, not really understanding that the suspense and the drama and the angst and all of these other things that they were absorbing were actually having a stronger effect on them audio-visually than anything that they went to go see at the concert hall. I think that's ironic. I think that it made it into atonality and 12-tone and serial music and all that stuff. It's just it's there. Okay, but I don't want to get hung up in that too much. I really want to focus more on orchestration. So I do think that they were good orchestrators. Okay. Okay, I've been practicing orchestrating recently. I don't have access to real musicians. How much can I trust the MIDI to be an accurate representation of the piece and to know if I'm making progress? Well, I mean, look, you are going to have to meet musicians eventually and work with them. I mean, that is the step, right? And I think I've talked about this in my Getting Performed video. Just, reaching out to people, even if you're the player, if you're the pianist, and maybe working with a violinist or doing something small, and just to even start with, just to even have a conversation, even if you have other orchestral plans. I think it's a really important thing. And I mean, that's part of chamber music. It was kind of like a calling card for a lot of composers back in the Romantic period and the Classical period. They would combine over smaller works, and that was a way of connecting. Some of the chambers in which this chamber music was premiered were like the houses of people who connected people with orchestral jobs and things like that. I don't think that happens anymore today, but it's a part of the culture. It's So I mean, I can't say how much can you trust it. I would say the best way to do is just a score read, right? I think you've already seen my Tchaikovsky test, where I test the Sibelius 7 sounds that they claim to be professional, and you can see that you can't really trust it to really sound right. I think Note Performer is more accurate, but even still, that is not a real orchestra. So, I mean. Yeah, it's sort of like saying, like, how much can you trust, a fish stick to be actual fish? I can't say. But you will gain the knowledge yourself with more score reading, more comparisons of the type of orchestration that you are attempting. Okay, let's keep on. Oh, you're welcome. By the way, I'm not greeting everybody by name. I'm really sorry about this, but I really do appreciate everybody's question. I'll try to mention more names. Okay, Alessandra asks, hey, can you tell us what you think about Vincent Persicchetti's book, Harmony of the 20th Century? I think it's a really great book, and I think that you should read that book, and you should watch Alan Belkin's video series on modern harmony. Because that's sort of the bridge, right? That makes, Alan's course helps you make sense of what Persicchetti's resources allude to, and I think he even talks about it in a more practical way, how to apply it. So that's my recommendation there. Is it more effective to orchestrate as you compose or compose before orchestrating? I think it just depends on what kind of orchestrator you are. It's perfectly possible to take a piece of piano music and to just turn it into something incredibly orchestral, and that's sort of the Ravel approach, right? And it is possible to compose orchestrally from the very beginning, which was another approach of Ravel's. Knowing that even if he was writing out a piano score or a shortened score, knowing that these instruments would be applied to that to that particular musical line, right? So my recommendation is it's better to score every way. Okay? To be able to take piano music and make it something huge. To write something as a piano score and make it into something bigger. To take something bigger and make it into a piano score. I mean, I had a friend who lived for like a dozen years. She was the best friend of an opera composer in Europe, and the opera composer would send her, her huge scores, and then they would be reduced by my friend. So, I mean, yeah, so just every single way that you can turn something into something orchestral or back again is important to know for a professional musician or a professional composer. When orchestrating a piece, how to avoid overdoing it, Jaware asks, and how to achieve the most economic and effective outcome without neglecting some instruments. I think you just need a sense of proportion, right? That's something that orchestrators don't always think about when they're developing. They just want to write the biggest thing all the time, right? And there are actually some scores that are like that, and some films like that. Some film scores that are like that, because just everything is relentless. But yeah, you do need breathing space. You need a sense of tension and release. Once again, I think score reading is the key to this. It's just to really understand when to be big and when to be little. And you can be big and soft, right? You can have an enormous tutti that's very complex, and the dynamic can be pianissimo, right? Or you can have something that's extremely loud that is only like 8 instruments, like 4 trombones and 4 trumpets. Okay, Philip asks, Not sure if you're into this topic with video game music becoming really popular. Could you make a course on interactive/adaptive audio that can dynamically react to what happens on screen? I don't feel that that is my strength. But I appreciate the question. Maybe someday. I mean, it's a very cool question. I understand what you're saying, but yeah. Hey Thomas, I found that composing on a piano roll and transferring to notation after I'm done was the fastest and easiest way for me out of all I tried. What is your experience with this method? I mean, I actually did this once for fun, and like I made patterns and things like that, and just like to see how it would translate. And I think the thing is that like I've gotten, you know, composing is such a natural, organic thing, and it's more and more in my head that I just really have not needed to do that. It's more like kind of, you know, what did Honegger say? He said, you know, to the outside observer, when I'm composing, I look like a man on a holiday, right? And that's exactly the way it is with me. I might be taking a walk somewhere, and I might be composing something at the same time, you know. Everybody else is sort of looking at the scenery and listening to the birds tweet, and I'm just thinking, you know, crash, boom, you know, lines going like this, and so on and so forth. So that's how I compose nowadays, is just, you know, looking like I'm doing something useless, which maybe I am. Hello from Spain from Miguel. Hi, Miguel. So, do you start your composing as the job comes in? Are you always working on something which will eventually end up on a job offer? That's a very good question. It's sort of a combination of both. I mean, I think I recently blogged about having a kidney stone and lying in the hospital and kind of reviewing some of my works. And what I mentioned there was that, like, if I don't finish something, if I don't completely score something out, it stays in my head forever, right? And actually there are some songs that are kind of embarrassing that I wrote as a teenager that are still in my head because I never wrote them out and said, I'm finished with them, I abandoned this. You know, they made a deep impression on me. But, so I always have pots boiling, right? Being a freelance composer, a freelance artist, is like having a big stove with about 16 burners. And each of those burners represents a kind of job or a kind of client or different clients. And you're always stirring one and just having another one ready. And sometimes when somebody comes along, you know, and you have to make a sauce with this pot over here, you already have this one little thing over here, and then you just add it to the pot. So I'm always working on something. I'm doing more education over the past couple of years because of the books and the courses and everything else, but that doesn't mean I'm not scoring. I mean, I did about a year's or half a year's worth of scoring in about 6 weeks last month, and boy, that was just, or last year, sorry. And I feel like I'm still recovering from that. Okay, next question. My opinion on Brahms, the orchestrator. Okay, so this is going to be a like a tip or something. Okay, Brahms is a great orchestrator from the symphonic perspective of the people in the orchestra who want to play together and make beautiful music. Okay, that is what he's doing, and that is what Beethoven's doing, and Mozart's doing, and Schubert is doing. Sometimes that means that the scoring feels a little out of balance, or it feels a little clunky or blocky, you know, with everything just kind of chugging along in just kind of large, less digestible, less smooth and artistic ways. But to the people playing that symphony, you know, that Brahms symphony, they feel connected with everybody else in the orchestra, right? So that is another kind of scoring. And it's not the kind of scoring that gets used in film and stuff, because it really has to do more with the musician and with the connection with the audience, right? So in that way, Brahms was a great orchestrator. And you know, I've taken different lines from out of his works and used them as musical examples, and they work beautifully. They really play on the instruments really well. But do they have the same sense of smoothness and artifice as Ravel or Tchaikovsky or whatever? No, of course not. But that's because Brahms is coming from a different place, and so is Schumann, by the way. Okay. But other than that, I don't want to get into it more because I have more thoughts to put down on it. Can we talk about how clean orchestral music sounds and why it is so beautiful? That would be another really long discourse. Probably having a balanced score at all times. So like that, for that you want to study Berlioz, and and what came out of Berlioz, like a lot of the French opera composing between Berlioz and the and the modern era. Like once again, Massenet. I mean, so you have to, and that's kind of a subjective term, clean orchestration. But I would say just make sure that your score is balanced. That will get you a clean sound, clear sound, where the musicians can really hear each other and the sound isn't complicated. Okay. Oh, you're welcome, Juan. Juan asked me, thank you so much. And he asks, what are the exercises you recommend to a professional musician to keep improving their orchestration skills? Score read, score read, score read. You should be score reading like 20 minutes to an hour a day. And you should be doing two types of score reading. One is you should be score reading through many different works, and you should be trying to build up your level of comprehension so that you can understand more and more things simultaneously. So, score read piano music and chamber music and string quartets and, and Mozart wind serenades, and just really try to understand exactly what is going on at every moment. And then, the earlier classical symphonies and, then opera and so on and so forth, just building towards understanding more and more vertical information and absorbing it. So that's one kind of score reading. The other kind of score reading is you should make certain pieces that really resonate with you into special studies and score read those works on their own, also individually, quite a bit, until you don't even need the recording to listen along to as you score read. Eventually, you just look at it and you just hear the notes in your head, and then eventually you just pick up some other piece of music and you see it, and because you've been developing your ear, you look at it and you just go, da 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 bum bum. You see it, you hear it. And so along with that, of course, would go a lot of ear training and a lot of solfege, a lot of anyways, it's too complex to get into now, but all right. Okay, practice etudes and so on, practice long notes. What would be the equivalent in orchestration? Just score read. Let's keep it simple for that for now. How quickly or fast can each of the standard brass instruments play? Well, they can, the thing is the faster that they go, the faster that they can go, they can go really fast, but it's like, do you really want that sound, right? Why do you want it to sound fast? What is the reason why you feel that that's a good idea to go that fast, right? You need to answer that question before you say, oh, well, how fast can you play? I had a piano teacher who could play anything, and I started writing things and saying, can you play this? And he said, of course I can play this. And he'd sit down and we'd play it, and I tried to make it harder and harder, and eventually he said, listen, what are you trying to say musically here? And that was just a really good lesson for me. Because I wasn't really saying anything, I was just throwing a bunch of notes at him. It wasn't very musical, right? So just really make sure that your idea is expressing something, and it's not just about velocity or showing off or just seeing how far you can push them. There are many great examples of speedy brass tonguing, triple tonguing, double tonguing. Check out the brass parts or the trumpet part for Alvarado del Gracioso by Ravel. His orchestration of that's pretty fast. Do you have experience? Alex asks, do you have experience using electronic sounds within orchestration? Yes, I do. How do you think those sounds are changing modern orchestration? Well, sometimes they're used to sort of sweeten the sound of orchestral cue. People were astonished to discover that John Williams, who's got the most natural sounding orchestral, just really sounds just like completely unblemished orchestral sound that, that part of the process of people recording his orchestration is to add some orchestral textures on synths to kind of just really get exactly just fine-tuned. And I see that as mixing, right? That's a form of mixing. It does not invalidate his orchestration in any way because it works fine on stage. You can take, forget about those synthesizers they're using to mix his score with. You just take his orchestral music and you put it on a concert stage and it works fine, right? So people shouldn't worry about that too much. But as far as just like the sound itself, it's a flavor. I feel that it's a crossover flavor, and if it's the more synth you add, the less it becomes about the orchestra, really, because it's just not it's not really a core member. Whenever you throw something out like that, it's going to dominate, and very rarely does it just find a place in the texture, right? So. I just think something else will come, some other kind of sound will come along and it'll get used in the orchestra for a while and we'll be wondering about that. So that's my idea about that. Okay, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Gripped Pipe says, as a horn player, look at the double tonguing from excerpt from pictures at an exhibition. Oh yeah, absolutely. And please don't do that. Okay. Okay, Philip thanks me. That's great. Yeah, Melinda asks, hello, I was wondering, what do you think about video game music and soundtracks? I think somebody asked up there. I think it is great when they go to the expense of hiring an orchestra and, and putting orchestral, real true orchestral sounds into video games. I think that is fantastic. And a lot of the scoring for that is very much like Marvel Universe type scoring. It's just really aggressive, really macho, really just pushing the boundaries at all times kind of scoring. It's sort of synth sounding, sort of like synth orchestra put onto a real orchestra kind of a sound, and I think that's cool. It's just another element that is informing and changing the way that orchestra is played. I'm a big Mystery Science Theater fan, and their end credits now are an orchestral version of their theme, whereas in the original show it was sort of a synth orchestra sound. And I was listening to it, the first broadcast, and I was saying, God damn, that is a real orchestra. And I was really happy to learn that they had actually recorded in Eastern Europe this very cool theme, very nostalgic for me as a bad movie watcher. Okay, when did you start composing orchestral music? Age 13 was when I got my first, and I still have it, this poor book that I got from my father. And then the binding has fallen off. This has fallen off, and I just read this book to death. Walter Piston's Orchestration. My father bought the best birthday present I ever got, and that was when I started writing orchestrally. Because I'd written some chamber music, like I wrote a piece for cello, guitar, and piano, and some other things like that. But and I aspired to write more complex things, but I wanted to really know the right way to do it first. And so my dad got me this book, and after that, I just composed and composed and composed. But when did I first compose something orchestral that was worth saving? Probably like 28 years old. In my mind, and that's just me being picky, because I know that some of those works are lovely in their own way, and they're probably meaningful to me if I were to really, but and there are a lot of things that I wrote before age 28 that I've revised, right? But it's not truly a work from that age anymore. It's just something that it's, in other words, it's a work in progress, right, up to the time of your final revision. Other than West Side Story, there are almost no Broadway scores available to study. Do you have any tips on how to orchestrate for theater? My biggest tip is to ask somebody who is really into it. I have scored musicals, and I feel like I'm still a student. as far as that is concerned. I mean, I know how to do it, and I could probably read up on it and get it done and get it out the door and not have to worry about it, and it would be a professional concert. But that doesn't mean that I am a top Broadway orchestrator, right? I mean, I probably could be if I was really, really working hard on it, and if I got lucky, and if I was talented enough, like a lot of ifs. So I think that you need to find more resources than asking me about that, okay? But I think that there are some really great people out there that have got some stuff. There might be some videos on YouTube about it, and there are some other things. But I mean, yeah, I mean, my specialty is concert orchestration and film orchestration. So Broadway orchestration is not my strength. Who are your top 3 orchestration goldmine composers, and which scores of theirs represent it best? Okay, so I'm going to say I don't have any favorites, but I'm going to give you a list that I want you to go score read. Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe, Holst's Planets. Okay? Most of those you can get at the library or a Dover Score or on IMSLP. So, I mean, but that's not to say that, I mean, it's my world of orchestration inside my head is filled with all different kinds of people, and I can't say, oh, I like this person more than this person, because that means that I'll score like this person more than this person, or more like me, right? So just the wonderful mixture of not playing favorites and taking what's useful from every composer is how I orchestrate. Greetings from Austria. Hi, Perpetual Motion. What is the best way to harmonically analyze huge orchestral pieces? Break them down. Break them down. Know what the function is, right? What is the function? And then, how are all those functions reflecting each other, right? Who's doubling whom? Who's handling the harmony? Where's the melody at? What instrument is soloing? What texture is forwards? How is the balance working out? And, just analyze that way, right? Then when you have a really clear view of how all those functions are working, then you can see how they all form a texture together, right? That's the best way, because, I mean, if you look at, like, say, The Planets by Holst, which I just mentioned, pretty much every note that is in The Planets, there's a few added ones in the orchestral score, but every note that is in The Planets, nearly, is possible being played by 2 pianists, right, of 5 fingers each. 10 fingers on each hand, or 5 fingers on each hand. Okay, so there's just there's a certain limit to how much information you can really make somebody understand or comprehend. You can actually, like, Hovannes would compose things that had like little improvised bits and had very complex textures, sort of oozing and sort of. Hovannes is another great orchestrator, by the way, and he would have so many things that you just couldn't intellectually comprehend it. You just would have to listen to it over and over and just find these deeper mysteries within it. And I think that's also a really valid form of orchestration, but it's really hard on the musicians and it's hard on the listener. So you just have to accept that there's a certain pathway you have to build to your listener. Okay, so there's some really, really great questions here. My voice needs to take a little rest, and I promised that I would be giving you guys some previews. So I'm setting up my next shot here. I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to sort of keep asking questions. I might not get to all of them today. I mean, I wasn't expecting this many questions. It's so awesome. But I promised that I would preview my Orchestration 103 Wind Instruments course. Now, you might ask, well, you already released the Wind Section course. Why do we need to know about wind instruments? Well, if you remember the Orchestration 101 course, it had a first section which was all of the technique and scoring issues involved with all of the string players, right? How do they all play the same way? What's the difference between them and everything else? And then the second half of the course was each individual instrument and what it could do and what were its abilities, and just had a really in-depth look. When we went to the wind section course, there are, we had to take a different approach because each woodwind family is so individual, and it's got auxiliaries. So it's almost like trying to cram you know, 4 times as much information as the string section course. So I made it into, you know, like the first half of the strings course, but for winds. And so this is like the second half of the strings course, but for winds. So each individual instrument. And it's going to end up having like 200 different excerpts, musical excerpts, top professional wind players playing these instruments, and New Zealand Symphony Orchestra and other orchestras having excerpts and so on and so forth. So I'm going to share this with you. It's going to be a little bit low res. This is all kind of like, it's 480 is what I'm broadcasting in, but I'm going to make this particular one a preview because I'm really happy with the way it turned out. So this is an excerpt on the English horn from the upcoming Orchestration 103 Wind Instruments course coming late spring. Okay, here we go. Piccolo. It's a true first-level auxiliary, with many first and second-chair oboists owning one as a matter of course, and keeping their chops active. Its range is about the same as the oboe, minus the low B-flat and some of the very high altissimo notes, sounding down a perfect fifth from its written pitches. As with most auxiliaries, all written pitches have the same fingering and overblowing as the standard model. Nevertheless, the English horn has different strengths of register than the oboe. It's been carefully designed so that its lowest register has far more dynamic and expressive control than the oboe's lowest notes. In a sense, the first octave and a half of the English horn's range represent its most characteristic tones, sounding E below middle C to B-flat above it, which is essentially an octave below the oboe's best register. So in uniqueness and strength of register, the English horn can be scored similar to the bass clarinet or contrabassoon, playing an octave below its standard model. Part of this greater control is provided by the bulbous bell at the end of the bore, designed to absorb some of the instrument's rougher projection and pungency of tone. But this doesn't mean that the lowest register is easy to play, merely that it's more manageable than the oboe's first register. A player still has to bring a lot of control to bear, especially in the case of a low solo passage. One of the outcomes of this focus on the lowest register is that the English horn really has a unique and compelling sound that stands on its own, and isn't just a slightly lower oboe. It also has enough strength to stand out as a solo or featured line in a more complex orchestral texture. All the same, the more carefully it's accompanied, the more dramatic and individual are the results. The middle register isn't quite as clearly defined, with its textbook boundaries extended and finessed in solo writing just like the oboe. Some composers neglect this range, and that's a shame, because it has its own essential colors and resonance that are capable of a wide range of nuance. The middle register compares very well with the oboes, sensitive, responsive, and full of emotional potential. Hi, everybody. All right, so I'm back. See, I'm trying to...
It's worth mentioning here that the English...
All right, sorry, I'm using this this app called Wirecast, and it's sort of hard to get it to work or stop working. Okay, all right, so I actually really love that that Wagner excerpt. I think it's like the most new age that Wagner ever sounded. It's just really kind of a delightful excerpt because it sounds so un-Wagnerian. You know, it just sounds really almost like Maurice Jarre or something like that. Actually reminds me of the soundtrack to Dreamscape. Anyway, so that's the caliber of stuff that you'll see, and you know, I'm enjoying working on this, and I was hoping to actually have it released by right now, you know, by end of April, but I've just really decided to take my time with it and make it as perfect as possible. So it might not be around until, like, you know, late May, early June, but it will be coming, and it's mostly completely scripted, and I just need to line up a few last recording sessions with my clarinetists and saxophone players, and then we'll be ready. Oh yeah, I should mention the Orchestration 102 course doesn't really mention saxophones very much. There are a couple of examples, but this one is going to make up for that and have you know, just a really full, very careful look at concert saxophone. And it's not going to really deal with issues of crossover scoring, like when you have a jazz band as part of your, you know, orchestral complement and so on. I'm not going to get into that, but I want you to be able to understand it as an orchestral instrument in a concert context. Okay, so I'm going to show you some sort of excerpts where I read a couple of tips from my 100 More Orchestration Tips book. But let's answer some more questions first, because I just really was having so much fun answering your questions. So I'm going to jump up here to where I left off. People have been answering each other's questions, and that's always really, really cool. That's what Orchestration Online is really all about. Okay. All right. Top 3 goldmine. Harmonically analyze. Any thoughts on sketching orchestrations for instrumental sections before adding macro before micro? I would say, just in general, maybe this will answer your question better than anything else, and that is, I often just scored my strings first, you know, and I know and then, like, the details that need to be worked out for winds and brass are things that are more obvious to me after the strings are completely scored. That's if I haven't worked it out already in my head. But, you know, sometimes I will be scoring, and to keep myself entertained, I will have the piece 80% worked out, and then maybe 20% I'm still working on, and I'm working on that section that's coming up in about a day or a few hours or whatever, and by the time I get there, I worked it out all mentally. But, you know, and then, or I might just be working it out, you know, as I go, which is just when I'm under a huge time pressure, and that rarely happens. But when it does, I will tend to work out the, you know, the featured instruments, soloists, and the string section first, and then adding the other instruments and proportioning them, and that way my music always stays in touch with a full orchestral sound with a lot of strings in it. Miguel asks, "Hi Thomas, is there any area in orchestration that you think is despised or unexplored?" Maybe neglected would be a better word for it. I think that as we're progressing into the 21st century, I think we're hearing a lot fewer concertos. And I think concertos are fantastic vehicles for soloists, for composers, and there are very few new ones being composed that are lasting into the repertoire, because I think a lot of times you know, sometimes the composer has an agenda, you know, they want a specific type of sound or concept or whatever that is fairly ephemeral, or maybe it's fixed in an older style, or some other kind of problem. It doesn't really capture the zeitgeist of today. And I don't think you should be a slave to whatever's popular today either. But it does mean that the concerto will have one performance or two performances, or maybe last for one season with one soloist. So, how to solve that problem? I don't have all the answers, but I just feel that there need to be more concertos. And then I think also composing specifically for community orchestra. That's something that's so important for a developing composer's career, and yet people just want to go straight to the end of their career. They want to just go straight to the complete fulfillment, working with the biggest pro orchestra, and here are all these, these orchestras that would love to play something, with most people who come to the Orchestration Online community, who are, still orchestration students and developing orchestrators, they're often, very, very often, they are composing things that a community orchestra would love to play. So put the two things together, I would say, because that really is, composing things that have a certain structural and conceptual simplicity, or directness, rather, is a better word for it. I think that's. There are really many works. The original culture from which the symphony orchestra came. The early symphonies of Haydn and Mozart. They were written for people who were semi-pro. That didn't have 8 hours a day to practice. So anyway, those are things I think neglected is a better word than despised. What other types of orchestral genres are there? I seem to know pieces related to nature and other pieces relating to royalty and ballroom dancing. I like nature related best. I think you mean themes, orchestrational themes. You should just know whatever turns you on. I think that's great. Indulge. Leonard asks a question: will orchestra players think that simple parts are boring to play? Not if they're worth it. Not if they're worth playing. Look, there are all these jokes about, like somebody stuck a GoPro on their viola and played the viola part for Bolero, and we all laughed about it. But the truth is that, it's fun. It's sort of like being it's like being in a choir and singing the middle voice, or being in a race and being in the middle or something like that, or or wearing a funny suit or something like that for like a big civic race where like people show up and do all kinds of crazy things. Ravel can write that in his Bolero piece because A, it's really fun, when everything is going, you just really feel like you're part of this hypnotic thing, and then then he writes the most beautiful stuff for viola. His viola parts in the string quartet are like, that is great writing, or the viola solo from the fifth movement of the Mother Goose Suite. God, his viola writing is really incredible. So I think he can be excused that, and I think the players are willing to do that. But if you write nothing but boring parts, if the piece itself is boring, then you're in trouble. That's what I'd say. People are thanking me for answering their questions. You're welcome, and thank you for showing up. But we still have way more to get through. So let's keep on it. Acer pseudoplantatus. Okay. Asks me. I'm trying to remember my botany and think, is that like a orange or a okay, or rose hips, or what is that? Okay, anyways, what are your thoughts on orchestrating purely polyphonic, especially imitative polyphonic as in fugues pieces? I think that it's great, except you have to think that you are putting function over texture and balance, right? So if what is the problem with Bach orchestrations and some Mozart and Beethoven orchestrations? What is the so-called problem? Well, there isn't a problem, because it's music that has that same function that I was talking about with Brahms orchestrations, where people are working together and they're having this huge excitement, and the audience listens to the excitement and they relate to it, and everybody has a good time. However, there is a certain amount of textural scoring that is sacrificed, right? So, like asking me, do I think that, like, say, the Grosse Fuge by Beethoven would be a good orchestral piece? I mean, I've actually heard it played with an enormous string orchestra, 40 players, and I just felt it was heavy and dense, and so, I mean, if you can make a texture out of the polyphonic events, out of those functions, then I think that you are on the key to orchestration. Of course, I think Bach could compose pieces that would sound good in almost any combination of instruments. So, yeah, and Mozart actually used to score. I mean, how he got in really, really strong with the Baron von Swieten was that he had a love for counterpoint, and Baron von Swieten had a collection of the well-tempered clavier that didn't have the preludes; it just had the fugues. And he had Mozart arrange those for string quartet, right? And then Mozart started writing fugues at home for keyboard, and it eventually ended up with some of the most incredible writing. I mean, I feel that is, from the time that he moved to Vienna to the time that he died, you just see that progression, and that is worth studying. So anyways, not to get too sidetracked, any chance I plan to evaluate Steve Reich's orchestration? Only if Steve wants me involved with an analysis of his works. As far as living composers are concerned, I'll evaluate my own orchestrations. I'll evaluate those of my friends. I've talked to Steve once or twice about other things, just meeting him after a concert or talking to him during a seminar or a symposium or whatever. And I mean, I really admire some of his work. I think it's great. And I'm also fascinated by some of the orchestration of Philip Glass, like his Akhenaton opera. I thought that was just incredible. But the thing is, it's just like it's securing the rights, being able to put it on a YouTube video, and and having permission to have that video played. And it's just really it's a lot of work for me. If I had staff, if I had 3 or 4 people working for me. And don't think that people have not offered to just intern for me for free. That would really be beautiful, but it would just make my life more complicated. I work best in a team of one, with the occasional help from 1 or 2 people. But but it's just a little bit more too involved. But I would love to do it someday. Steve, if you're watching this, get in touch with me. We'll make it work. All right, Ligeti, maybe if his family doesn't mind. Mystery Science Theater fans, yes, for the win. How can I join the MOOC course? You can join the MOOC course anytime you want. Okay, all of the curriculum is free online. You can start composing at any time. If you want me to evaluate your stuff, you can become a patron at whatever level I've put over there. I need to sort of update it, but it's all the content is free. I would love to, I'd love to have you over there and have a look at your pieces, or you could just do it on your own. You do not need me. You can work on it yourself. You can reach out to musicians yourself. You can have evaluations from them, or you can get together with a few other composers and maybe a teacher, and then just like all work on it together. That's the whole MOOC course is just designed to do whatever the heck you want to with it. Okay, and I'm establishing some ground approaches to how I'm doing it on Patreon, and I'll start putting those into like teacher's guides eventually. So all right, not to get into that too much. Okay, when dealing with chords with tensions, ninths, etc., scoring across sections of the orchestra, do you have methods for distributing the tensions or things you want to avoid? I just, thank you, Trey. I just basically think in terms of texture purely. If you're talking about tension and then resolution, or if you're talking about, harmonic stress or things like that, I actually use the texture and the quality of the orchestral voices to infer different things. You can take a 13th chord, and I would say you can study some of these from Ravel or Lily Boulanger, and you can orchestrate it in like 5 different ways, and each of those ways will infer a different emotion or a different color or a different texture, right? So it just depends on how you voice the chord and what instruments are playing what part of what voicing. And I think that is actually going to be, one of my, I mean, I could just write about that forever. So texture, but I hope people would want to read it. So, but someday, yes, I do have that topic planned. Hi, why don't we see new instruments and or improvements in the extant instruments more often? The contraforte seems truly superior to the contrabassoon, but will it ever catch on? Okay, this is from Richie Rare. It sort of reminds me of Ricercare. Richarare? Anyways, thanks for your question. Look, the whole problem is really one of money. You know what I mean? I mean, as some of you may recall, I recorded the Lupophone a few weeks ago with a player from Sydney Symphony Orchestra who is over here in New Zealand, and I recorded her right on the stage. And that Lupophone is so damn good. I mean, it's better than a baritone oboe. It's way better than a Heckelphone. Easy to play, has a beautifully balanced register all the way through. God, it's great. But how many of those Lupophones could Guntram Wolf and his associate shop in Germany turn out? Realistically speaking. And how long would it take to get all of the orchestras to be able to purchase one? And how long would it take for that instrument to make its way through? I mean, look how long it took for the saxophone to become a regular, or an occasional visitor to the orchestra. It was designed, in the sort of early middle of the 19th century, and then it wasn't really used until Bizet, right? Put it in L'Arlésienne, I believe. So, I mean, and of course, there are some things that are like improvements. Like, for instance, Adolf Sachs, he improved the bass clarinet, but it was already an instrument people were using. And so, and it also has to do with funding. Like, whenever you add a new instrument to an orchestra, like an actual new instrument, not just an improvement like the contraforte, that means that you need to hire more people. Right? And that's just a simple thing, is like, can the budget handle that new voice in there? I would be one completely for adding saxophones, a sort of slightly redesigned saxophone with a slightly mellower tone, slightly quieter. Some saxophones have been built along a slightly quieter model, slightly narrower bore, and just had certain things finessed about their construction to make them a little more fitting in with the orchestra. And I would be totally behind that, and I would love to score for that. But I know that if I do now, as the way the current state is, that my score will be only played by a very few orchestras who can play, the works of Percy Grainger and Vaughan Williams and so on. Okay. Magnus Green asks me, I really enjoyed part 1. I wondered if you could tell me when part 2 of the course on Ravel will be available. You mean the orchestration lessons? Coming up in a few days. Can you show us at some point in the future some of the first pieces you ever wrote? Oh, I would love to. But so I'd be showing my baby pictures. Like, you don't mind seeing me in my little lederhosen, that my mom had for me when I was 3. Yeah, it's like that kind of thing. Sure. My juvenilia. Well, I mean, I wrote some pieces I felt were pretty mature. Some of my flute and piano stuff. I wrote like a Rococo flute sonata where I incorporated modern day Rococo elements. Things that are more about style than substance. And I really had a blast writing that piece. So I'd love to share it with you one day. Have I tried mixing electronics with live orchestra? Already talked about that in a concert. Yes, I've done that as a crossover orchestrator. Yep. You're welcome, Jose. Jose thanked me. Martino Grosso. As a composer, what do you do when something you wrote turns out to be very difficult to play or even unplayable? Is it hard to rewrite while still being faithful to the original musical idea? I am always deeply embarrassed when I put some howler into my score, and I try to forget that it happened. That's my general approach. Is like fix it in the part, give it back to the musician, and just get it over with. So like whether it's hard or not is not the issue. The issue is fixing it in the way that the musician instructs, and also very important, letting the musician know that it's okay that they correct my work and that they have. I mean, I'll never forget. There's one conductor that I've worked with a few times, and he suggested some revisions to my scores, and he was, and I love this guy. He's just a really good friend of mine, and and he was still just really nervous and just really, he was worried. I could tell he was a little worried about making changes and suggestions. And God bless him. That was such a compliment that that he felt that my works were something that the original conception that I had had some integrity that was worth preserving and respecting, and that was just a huge compliment to me. So, you know who you are if you're watching this. Okay, but thank you again. That was just a really wonderful gesture. Some people have come and gone. Ciao for now. Well, come back because I think I'm going to make this into a 2-hour thing. I think we'll just keep going. Somebody said, I would advise you to be pragmatic in that case and value feedback from proficient players. I think they're referring to Martino's comment, yeah. Many good musicians I know almost take huge pride in wanting to play almost everything, and yes, most things are technically possible, but at a cost. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little perspective to this, and that is 15-second harp. And there are also a few timpanists who comment on Orchestration Online. And man, those people can do anything. Okay? That doesn't mean you should score anything. Okay? So just be careful. Really listen to 15-second harp's feedback. She will tell you if you've given her something that is really kind of way out there in a very polite way. But probably from her saying, well, this was a little hard to play means that it's kind of really hard to play, because she can play, you could probably just stick, some list down in front of her and she would sort of play it through, put some piano music, and she'd probably play it through on the harp as best she could, and it would sound fantastic. So just watch out. When a terrific player says that something is possible, just be aware that it's really sometimes the average excellent player that you're really scoring for. You cannot make just demand after demand after demand after demand and assume that it's all going to work out unless there is a certain amount of reputation and credibility that's going into this. You know what I mean? If you're John Adams or something like that, you can probably ask for more levels of difficulty. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to compose from your heart and compose what you feel and what you hear, but you should be aware of craft and what's possible for the orchestras that you're going to work with. And you may need to revise something, very ambitious, if you are working with, say, a semi-pro or a regional orchestra as opposed to like a top orchestra. Okay. Okay, you're welcome, Music Boy 801. When orchestrating, how much orchestration is too much? None! Yeah, I mean, you can overdo things. You need a sense of proportion, like I was mentioning before. I kind of talked about that already. Before writing music in specific times... Before writing music in specific instruments, do you write ideas first, like time, color? I just have a big wash of stuff happening in my head. That's me personally. But I think that having a really strong function in your music is incredibly important, because the texture and the balance are sitting on the integrity of that function. So if your functions do not have integrity, forget it. You just, Okay. Aster pseudoplantatus is a maple. That's what's going to be my next guess. Honestly. Of all the active living composers, who do you think is a great orchestrator? I think that some of the people working, for the active living composers, like, say if they were active living film composers, some of those orchestrators are just amazing, are really fantastic. I'm a little hesitant to just sort of name names because I kind of don't want to turn into just like a kind of the ever-ending thread, like why didn't I mention so and so and such, but I just really have huge respect for the film orchestrators that have been operating for the past 60 years, their contribution, and I have a lot of respect for people who are coming out of the who've come out of the conservatory system over the past 20 or 30 years. I mean, one of the greatest orchestrators I know of is Carolyn Yarnell, but I mean, orchestras are not playing her stuff as much as they should. So, but I respect the tradition from which she comes and her style and her sound, and I wish you could buy it on CD because it's really, really great. Anyways, that would just turn into, who do I think is great and who do I not, but anyway, let's move on. Alex asks, do you think it is beneficial or detrimental for composers to enter competitions? I think that it's cool if you don't take it seriously, and if you are submitting a work to them that already exists. Never write on spec. With on spec meaning like with the speculation that you'll be rewarded for your effort. Amongst hundreds of other applicants, right? So don't do that, right? My advice is to make the competition people do the work, right? So don't you give up a huge amount of your life to please them on the off chance that they'll pick you. And I mean, I've actually won a competition once. But I submitted a 2-movement piece, and the competitor said, look, we want to give you the prize, but we don't like the first movement. We love the second movement. So, but sorry, we already made our decision. So it's well, I guess I didn't win that one, right? Damn. But they still programmed my piece, and it was very, very kind of them, and they were very, very nice to me. So. But I mean, I've never won anything, so I mean, this is just so not important to what I do. So just imagine that you want to get where I am at in about, 10, 15 years or whatever. Just to let you know, competitions made absolutely no difference to my progress, and it was all just dealing with real people on the ground, convincing them to play my music, and that leading to more work and creating my own work that led to more attention and so on and so forth, and having my own thing. Okay. So the ecstasy of Piano asks, comments, hi Thomas, thank you for all you've done in the community. Have you ever developed an idea in a certain key but had to change it in order to better fit the music programmatically for the instruments? Yes. In fact, this happens all the time with vocal scoring, right? You might have, you might hear it in D flat, but it's really better in E. It might be too low in D flat, right? Or it might be too high in A, right? So there's a reason why there's a kind of a central, why is C major with no sharps and flats, and why are there certain sort of more centrally located pitches around the soprano register that have fewer complications, and a lot of it has to do with tessitura and all that other kind of stuff. So yes, I'm constantly transposing. I do not think that key is sacred. I don't think it really matters. I think relationships between keys matter, and the effect of the key on the instrument matters. But I don't. If a piece was originally written in D flat and it needs to be in D major to get an effect from the orchestra, I'll score it in D. Okay, Mark Mellitz, yes. yes, I think he is awesome. If he were interested, would you be interested in evaluating his orchestration? Maybe. I mean, I've got a ton of stuff. I might not get to it for a year or two. But, you know, Mark, I've actually, I think I've reviewed Mark's pieces before. So, and I think he's a cool guy. So, anyway, tell him hi from me. To do with writing for community orchestras, and even good high school bands, perhaps, asks Gripped Pipe, do you think you will go in to watch out for when writing a specific targeted... Okay, so in other words, having experience with the group, and, you know, just really listening to them and talking to them and hearing them perform, that's really important. I think some of you may already know that I was the I was the composer in residence for a virtuoso youth strings group that had no conductor, and they just basically stood in a circle and they just played at each other, you know. And they were some of the most dedicated kids I've ever worked with, and just amazing, the level of discipline and focus and intensity. And I got to know them very well. I got to know who could handle what concerto and whatever that I wanted to compose. So yes, I think that a personal relationship and observation of the group and everything, that I think that's really, really important. For instance, okay, another example is I was commissioned by the Citati Philharmonic to compose a concerto for Erhu, an orchestra, and I knew that the harpist in the orchestra was first class. And I eventually ended up scoring a harp concerto for her, you know, about 10 years later. But at this time, I just knowing that she was good opened a doorway in my creativity, and in came a harp part that you can watch online. So yeah, I think it's really important. What are some of the funniest interactions you've had with other musicians? I probably shouldn't say. I'm a little too focused on answering questions, but yeah, some of them are a little too naughty to mention on a video. You know, some of them are just things like, you know, when a ping pong ball got stuck down a sousaphone and then got blown out at the conductor, you know. I mean, there's some things like that. The time that somebody left a cello out in the sun, the hot sun, during a youth orchestra fundraiser, and all the, you know, enough of the glue melted in it so that it exploded. Yeah, I mean, there's some funny stuff like that, but all right. I probably should focus on orchestration. What's the best way to improve audiation? Do you mean your inner ear? Okay, so if you're talking about improving your inner ear, okay, it's okay. Once again, score reading and memorizing long stretches of music, just internally. So, like, and I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it now. Speaking of funny interactions with musicians, I love every style, okay? But I'm not fond of things that are played too often. And one thing that was played far too often when I was 16 years old was the soundtrack from Saturday Night Fever, okay? So not to cast aspersions on commercial disco of the late 70s, which I do not enjoy, but, you know, but it works for some people and it's fine. And I like the concept of disco and other things like Eurobeat and Kraftwerk and, you know, other musicians. Power pop, yeah, that's always fun. But anyways, I by the time it came out, I pretty much, you know, remembered long stretches of orchestral music. So, you know, if any of these earworms got stuck in my head, I would just play back Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, and I would keep playing it back until the earworm was completely gone or I'd forgotten all about it. And sometimes those earworms were so catchy, and 70s music was infernally catchy. So that I would have to like play the whole damn symphony all the way through up to the very last bar of the fifth movement. Okay? So having long stretches of orchestral music in your head, you know, eventually you're able to sort of mix and match and edit, and you know, you can edit Beethoven's work and, you know, put it to a banjo, you know, You can mix things up and do things in your head far faster than you can do them on a keyboard. So yeah, so those are all steps. Memorizing long stretches of music on your own, being able to pick up the score and look and see what you're hearing in your own head instead of playing it back. Those are all things that are really important. And also composing without anything but a pencil. Try that out. Okay. There can only be one Ferneyhoff. Okay. I'm going to conservatory next year. I have two really good options. What should be the deciding factors on where I decide to go? I would say I've had a daughter who went to music schools, and I've worked with a lot of people who come and gone through music schools. Two deciding factors. One is, do you get along with the instructors? Have you talked to them? Are they simpatico with your music? Do you have a realistic idea of what it's going to take to study with them? Do you have sympathy and support there? That's number one. Number two is, are you going to be comfortable with the living arrangements, right? Some people just don't really, it's hard to do music when you're living in a dorm with a neighbor who, whose favorite group is something you hate or whatever. Or maybe you'll be renting somebody's basement in that college town or something like that. Are you going to be able to function there away from your family? Or is it better to stay with your family, who will drive you crazy while you're trying to study? So I think those are the two main things. Do you get along with the administration and have a clear idea of that it's going to fit you really well? And the other one is, are you going to have a good, comfortable living arrangement? Okay, and just to mention, we've gone past the hour-and-a-half mark, but I'm going to go for 2 hours with this if everybody doesn't mind, because I'm still seeing a lot of people with questions, and I would like to play some of my tips. So let's have a few more questions before I go to the tips. Okay, Ori Davidovich, asks me, how do you think music is going to change in the following decades, and what do you think characterizes music today? Huge freedom, to answer to your second question. People doing what they want and not having to follow a school, okay, so the 1950s was a beautiful time in terms of experimentation and going in different directions, but there was a certain scholastic discipline and conceptual logic and so on and so forth that kind of almost prevented like anybody going back to the root and going on a different direction, right? So it was sort of like this branch sprouted those branches, and you could only move forward along that course of branches. And that music is still considered to be relevant today. Now, my question was, if in the 50s they were saying that music that was composed in the teens and 20s was no longer relevant, then why is there the same respect for that music that was forged in the 1950s, 60, 70 years later? And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be. I think that it should definitely be respected. I have a huge joy in all styles of music, and and I respect that the traditions that have evolved from those branches that seemed to limit, going back to the root and taking another direction. But I just think we should have a perspective of the real, the whole history of what's going on, and we should draw from everything that inspires us, right? But as to where music is headed, I have no idea. I cannot be your tour guide, except I can just comment as we all move forward in time together. Okay, you're welcome, Daniel. Daniel's thanked me. JR-RYB, what is your favorite instrument and why? Well, that's my favorite instrument to play right there. The mandolin. Except my fingers have just gotten bigger and clumsier and stupider, and so I'm probably going to get an octave mandolin or a mandola soon, because it's just playing those tiny little frets. I can't be bothered anymore. I'm too lazy. That's my favorite instrument to play. As far as my favorite instrument orchestrally to score and anything like that, the orchestra is my favorite instrument. Okay. What are your thoughts on George Crumb's style of orchestration? Okay. How do I go about pushing the boundaries? I go about pushing the boundaries just by, trying to find my own voice, and then, I don't know about pushing boundaries. I just bring a new voice into the mix, into the conversation. I don't worry too much about being a standout composer or breaking down. I think I think there's a role for that, but I don't know if I'm not a, I don't want to tear down castle walls. I don't want to forge new directions. I just want to just say what I have got on my mind. What is my thing? All right. So one more question before I go to the tips. Okay. When composing for a specialized group, i.e., drum and bugle corps, how do you keep an original voice while keeping the identity of the original piece, while also downsizing from full orchestra? Well, you just use your craft, right? So your original voice, like you're taking an orchestral piece and you're simplifying it or downsizing it or whatever, like making a piano score or this is okay. One little anecdote, and that is, I have a bass concerto, and I did a piano reduction of the string. It's for strings and bass, and I did a piano reduction of the orchestra part, and then forgot all about it. Well, I have a friend who had just a really phenomenal bass student, and he wanted to enter the Wellington Youth Orchestra competition, where just a member of the orchestra can play a concerto in like a piano and soloist version, and then if that, whoever does the best wins the prize, which is to perform that concerto live with the orchestra. Okay, so my friend had a copy of my piece for her student, and he learned it, and and I helped him out with it. He was a really cool kid, Louis Vander Mespel, and not a kid anymore. He's a young man now, but he asked me for my advice and feedback and so on. I gave it to him, and I just didn't think anything more about it. And then he said, "Oh, I've entered the competition. Can you show up?" And I got really sick that day, so I couldn't show up for the actual competition demonstration. And he won, to my complete surprise. I had absolutely no idea. And but what everybody was saying was, "Oh, the piano arrangement was so beautiful." And I was thinking, well, I was just trying to make the strings work for piano. I wasn't really thinking about making the piano beautiful or anything, but just like having the piano communicate the idea of the arrangement to the soloist. So that was an accidental compliment. I was not expecting a compliment on that, and So look, I think just maintaining the meaning of the music in a meaningful way, sometimes will lead to beauty. Okay, that's all I could say about that. Okay, so I'm going to sort of set up this next shot. Okay, so this is going to be a tip about scoring four horns. Excuse me, scoring 6 to 8 horns. I hope you enjoy it. Tip number 38: scoring 6 and 8 horns. A frequent question I get from orchestrators is how to score horns in groups of 6 or 8 players. Once the reasons behind the established 4-horn scoring approach are understood, especially the third player as the middle high horn with the fourth as its low partner, then the next question becomes, how do the horns stack up when 6 players are available, or 8? And these are very fair questions because the answers are just as counterintuitive as the 4-horn scoring approach might seem to developing orchestrators. If horns 1 and 3 are the high horns, and 2 and 4 the low horns, then does horn 5 become the lowest high voice, and 6 the lowest low voice? When in horn doubt, go to the Gustavs, Mahler or Holst. Both composers had standout approaches to scoring multiple horns. Richard Strauss is also exemplary in this regard. Let's start with Gustav Holst's scoring of the planets, because his approach is as direct and uncomplicated as possible. In Mars, he scores the horns as 2 staves of 3, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6. This makes horn 4 into the middle high horn, leading a subsection of 3, which you can see in many of the chorale-like passages. Sometimes both sets of 3 will be playing the same chords, with 1 doubling 4, 2 doubling 5, and so on. Or the 2 groups will play the same chord an octave apart, with 1 to 3 on the high chord and 4 to 6 on the low chord. When low horns have a featured line, then 5 and 6 become unison partners, as in the beginning statement which thickly doubles bassoons 1 and 2. In the 4 other movements with 6 horns, as there are only 4 horns in Mercury and Neptune, Holst spreads the horns in pairs over 3 staves. A very common approach is to score the first 4 horns in their traditional positions, but to place the bottom 2 horns below them in harmony, essentially making them into the dominant low voices. But not always. Sometimes each staff becomes an A2 position in a chordal arpeggio, which throws the traditional approach right out the window. And sometimes the positioning is just what it needs to be, like in the first massive tutti chord of Jupiter, in which the top and bottom staves double each other, and the middle staff plays in the center, or bottom, or top as need be. For the treatment of 8 horns, let's see what the other great Gustav has to say. In Mahler's Third Symphony, he scores a chorale with doubling on each pitch, 1 and 2 on top, 2 and 5 middle high, 4 and 7 middle low, and 6 and 8 on the bottom. The effect of this strategy is to interlock the chords across the entire section, rather than letting the bottom 4 horns get disconnected from the top 4. Of course, this also means that the 2 middle pitches are doubled by partners who are sitting more than 2 seats away from each other, so it's not without an element of risk, but it's still a fantastically satisfying sound. In other places, Mahler simply stacks the pitches according to seated pairs, with 1 and 2 on top through to 7 and 8 on the bottom. Or he'll have the odd-numbered players play a unison melody, while the even-numbered players hold down the harmony. Sometimes the 3 lowest and 3 highest players will play an octave melody, with the 4th and 5th players taking the middle voice. And occasionally all the players will combine for one massive push on a unison melody. This approach has been echoed by film composers in many scores, such as the theme to Star Trek Voyager. When you have the power, you might as well use it from time to time, so long as it doesn't drown out everything else in your orchestral universe. Tip number 38. Okay. So I'm back. Sorry, I still don't understand how to use Wirecast, but I'm learning. So anyhow, we'll get to tip 38 on or tip 71. Sorry, it will be the next one on how to make 1 or 2 little changes in your harp tuning in order to get a really, really cool glissando. All right, but let me go back to the stream here and here we go. Okay, so back up to questions. How important is coffee a factor in the workflow process? For me, I am a teetotaler. I don't drink tea, I don't drink coffee, I don't drink booze, I don't take pills. I just live in a huge flurry of music. It would be boring that would be a come down from my musical high to take stimulants. But I will say one thing, that there is a certain substance which is extremely important to the creative process. Chocolate. I find chocolate to be a very, very fun thing to nibble on from time to time. As you can probably tell, if I were to stand up, that some of it is stuck around, actually, in my daily life. So, on to the next question. Message retracted, that's cool. Thank you for answering my previous question. I'm currently working with exotic instruments from the Middle East, for which there is no standard notation. Any advice for how to notate them? I would say notate everything out the way that you would were it, say, like an oboe or a guitar or something like that. Just use a standard notation for the closest possible instrument, and then let the soloist worry about that. Now, this is interesting. Erhu notation. The Erhu is the Chinese violin. It doesn't look anything like our sort of strip. The musical staff is basically a strip of information, and it does not look like that at all. That's a different philosophy on how to absorb what to do. But most Erhu players are trained in reading Western notation, so they basically want you to score as if it were for a violin. With the open strings of the same open strings of the violin of D and A, and just basically learn what an Erhu is capable of, which I'm still learning. I've actually composed 4 or 5 pieces for Erhu and orchestra, and I just really feel that only 1 or 2 of them worked that well, and I would want to revise the other ones before publishing them or letting them loose. Okay. What are your thoughts on composing away from the piano versus composing at the piano? Asks Henry Wilf. Well, look, the thing is that it all happens right here, right? Everything that you play, like you play a piano or you mess with your DAW or whatever, your physical body, your brain is telling your physical body to go and make sounds on something, and then you hear the sounds in your head and you assemble them as you play them. Okay, so your body is helping your brain to organize the sounds. But the more you organize the sounds, and the more that you edit them, and the more that you compose them, and the more that you do all this stuff, the less you need to touch something outside of your brain. And the more that all that stuff that you're used to using just starts to manifest itself inside your skull. So for me, it just makes no difference because I compose away from anything. It's just always in my head. But what I would say is, as a developing composer, the perspective that you need me to tell you about, composing away from the piano versus composing at the piano, I would say when you compose away from the piano and it's a mental thing, then you really challenge your ear to get better, right? So if you're into challenging your ear to get better, then that's where it's at. But if you need to compose at the piano, there's nothing wrong with that because that's Stravinsky, right? Possibly our most advanced orchestrator of all time still needed a piano to sort of check the tones and work on everything, So there's no shame in using an outside source. But it's just in my case, I'm doing a lot of orchestration and I'm doing things really fast and I have to get it out the door. And, it might not be that great. Maybe my pieces aren't that good. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm putting too much pressure on myself. Maybe my ear would be better served by reaching out. I'm not one to judge that. I will let history judge that if anything that I ever compose survives into history, becomes a part of the record. And that I won't presume. Shane asks, what instrument would you use in a mock-up for the basset horn in Mozart's Requiem? Like as an alternative, I would use the bass clarinet because the bass clarinet can cover that whole range. And, unless you're going really, really high with one of those notes, Antoine Patrick asked where can he get my book? Okay, so 100 more orchestration tips will be released in August. 100 orchestration tips. The first book is available on orchestrationonline.com, and it's like in the sidebar to the right hand. You can get a copy of it. People are thanking me. You're really welcome, Evie Martinez. Thanks so much for showing up. And if I inspired you to press on, then damn it, go for it. All right, just keep going, keep creating. It doesn't matter. Just put offside all expectations. Just get to the end of your piece, because the artistic process is what's important, not the artistic product. Okay, a few more questions here. I don't know if it's Robin Garin or Rob Ingeren. Here in Norway, there's a composers collective. A very long question. Okay, some experiences or advice in creating communities of composers. Okay, so this is a really good question. Rob, I want you to check out my video that talks about composer groups. I think that will answer most of what you're asking here, but I think that what really moves composer groups is events, okay? I think events and nowadays, building a media presence that's on the internet. So if you have people who go to your concert, and if they go and they sign up on your Facebook page or whatever social media that you've got, and and they can, they can sort of become your little audience, which can get bigger or smaller, or you can take that audience in whatever direction you want to. But having a relationship with an audience is really important, I think. I mean, that doesn't mean that you have to kowtow to them. See, everybody gets this wrong. When you say, oh, I think, relationship with the audience, with the composer is really important. And they immediately say, oh, well, you're selling out. That's totally not it at all. Look, you are the most important part of your audience, right? When you compose something that you enjoy, you're composing for an audience. Your audience, the audience of you. And there are people out there who relate to the way that you understand and appreciate art and love music, and they are going to have a resonance with what you do. So you want to hang on to them. You want to develop a relationship with them, okay? I mean, if you look at Beethoven's works, his opus, or his corpus, whatever, his entire life's work is a story of relationships. Look at the dedicatees to his pieces. Some of them were just put on there so he'd get a few extra bucks, but some of them are written with a deep amount of appreciation. And some of them are written in anticipation of a relationship. Like the Kreutzer Sonata was written in anticipation of a long and fruitful artistic relationship with Frank Bridgetower, who was a great violinist. And they had a big fight after the premiere, and so Beethoven changed the name to the Kreutzer Sonata after another violinist named Kreutzer, who never played the piece or didn't appreciate the genius of that piece. So look, relationships are really what matter. Relationship of artist to musicians, of artist to audience, of audience to the musicians. All of this stuff is just really, it's a community. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Okay. Okay, somebody says they're really slow working by ear. Well, don't you worry about that. You just keep working on your stuff, all right? If I'm telling you the fastest way that I know how to do something, then that's just me, all right? And I like the fact that I like that you've got I should say Hjardakill. I like that you've got a Tolkien name. Hjarmendakill would be another name of that kind. What's my favorite Mahler moment, orchestration-wise? Probably like the end of the last movement of the first. I just think that that's so funny and over the top, and it's just joy. I mean, there's other things that he orchestrated better, but I mean, I just think that that's just tons of fun, and I've actually used it as music on one of my videos. Let's see. How do I feel about scoring low flute for melodies? Well, I think that low flute for melodies is fantastic, just so long as the orchestra around it, the accompaniment to it, is very, very delicate and complementary of the tone, right? You can have a very delicate, let's say that you had like low horns that were in a position where they were creating overtones that were sitting right where the flute needed to play. Not a good idea. But let's say that you had low horns that really stayed out of the way. So, you have to just try things out. Yeah, but low flute for melodies is great. Just look at how low flute is. You're saying you see it quite often in scores. Well, look at the score and see what the score is telling you about how to make that low flute melody work. If I'm playing a divisi part for two horns on one staff, is it possible to have different dynamics separately? You mean a split part for two? Yeah, only use the word divisi for strings, okay? But if you're having a divided part for two horns on one staff, of course, yeah. I mean, it might not work in Sibelius playback, but yeah, that's a very common thing. You just put the first voice dynamics on top and the second voice dynamics on the bottom. Who is the Orchestrator, you mentioned Hovannes. Yeah, Alan Hovannes, Yarn Fox has answered. Yeah, Alan Hovannes, check out his stuff. His stuff. I can't remember the name of the piece. I think it was it Mysterious Mountain? Anyways, he had his what he's called his cloud technique, which is, I guess nowadays, just people would just say it's improvisation across a set of tones, and so he composed this, and it is just the most beautiful, fantastic, eerie piece, and it practically started a fist fight after the premiere during the intermission. People were out there in the hall, and people got so angry about it. So I mean, I think that's comparable to the Rite of Spring, except that maybe even more honestly a dust up than the Rite of Spring. The Rite of Spring's stormy premiere is a bit exaggerated. Is it useful for learning orchestration to actually hand copy certain scores that you love? Okay, people ask me this all the time. I mean, yeah, if that helps you. I mean, some people say that it helps them. I never did that, so I can't say whether it would help me or not. But I mean, working with notes a lot and arranging them and scoring them out is what helped me. And that's probably the same thing that you are talking about. I mean, just if that is one way that really introduces you to the actual notes you're listening to, then great. Planning on doing any Bruckner stuff? Possibly the 7th in about 2 years. I don't know. I mean, there's just so many things I need to get to first, and I really owe Lily Boulanger some attention coming up soon. Thoughts and opinions on Classic FM? It's kind of turning into a joke site, and I mean, I think there's a place for that, and I don't think that we should beat up on them too much. I mean, it's sort of like, it's kind of like if you are, let's say that you're a writer, like if we were all sitting around talking about writing tips, and somebody were to say, well, what do you think about Cliff's Notes, or what do you think about the New Yorker's literary joke column or whatever, I would just sort of say it's not very professional, but whatever. I mean, it doesn't really bother me. But every once in a while they'll put something up that is just so wrong about the idea of what music should be, and maybe it's being provocative, maybe it's being insulting, maybe the people who are doing it just don't know what they're talking about. It's probably usually. But I mean, there's just so many things I can waste my time on. So if I can unite the community around learning something, if there's a teachable moment around a really, really dumb Classic FM post, then I'll teach it. But otherwise, I just ignore it. Okay. Textbook recommendations for orchestration. Go to orchestrationonline.com and look in the books. I've got resources or links to resources, and look at the books column. Okay, so listen, that pretty much is the last question that I'm seeing. So I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm going to give you the last tip, and I'm going to try to run the credits for my Patreon group. After that, all the people who have contributed to make this this all happen. And I just so much appreciate them, and I appreciate their efforts too on their own music and how they share things. Yeah, and I'm really fond of a lot of those people personally too. That I've got to know them. I don't want to mention any names because I don't want to leave anybody out. But I mean, yeah, some of them are my students, some of them are my friends. And all of them are really generous people who are helping all of you. That I would say, if you want to thank me, thank the people on Patreon who are supporting all this content. I really so do appreciate their interaction with me and how they've made the MOOC work and how they've made everything else work. And if you're probably noticing by now that I say that I've answered the last question, and people are probably finishing up typing new ones. I'll try to remember some of these. I'll take a screenshot of the questions, and maybe we can answer them next time I do a Q&A. I really love doing this. I'd like to do this more often, maybe every 2 or 3 months. So, anyway, thank you. I'm not even sure how I got this to work, but here is my last tip, and I'm thanks again. Thanks for coming, and I really enjoyed these questions, and let's do it again.
Tip 78. Quick harp glissando tricks. Harp glissandos can be thrilling, and they can be utterly predictable. One of the most common unconscious errors an orchestrator can make is to only score the full diatonic scale of a harp in a glissando when there are so many other options. By simply changing some pedals to reflect an enharmonic unison with another pitch, the composer can selectively erase certain parts of the scale for a more open kind of sound. Let's take a full C major scale arpeggio, in which every pitch is present. What you'll start to notice after a while is the leading tone of B to C. It gives the arpeggio a certain solid, thick character. It's certainly appropriate in many, if not most, cases. But what happens if we simply ask the harpist to tune that B to a B sharp, sounding C? We get a kind of hexatonic scale, which naturally feels more open and less heavy. From here, we could ask the player to sharpen the E string to E sharp, giving us an F pentatonic scale. Or we could leave the E alone and flatten the F to create a C pentatonic. Both options considerably lighten the weight of the glissando and subtract a certain amount of harmonic solidity. There's a freer direction the music can take now. In the key of C, it's fairly simple and quick to ask the harpist to change the tuning to C pentatonic. She'll push down on the B pedal to the left for a sharp, while pedaling up on the F pedal to the right for a flat. When pedal changes are positioned on either side of the harp, they're much easier on the player. As you can see in this example, the pedal changes for F and E flat are both positioned one to each foot. As you can see in the lower part of this example, the pedal changes for F and E flat are both positioned one to each foot. As they are for G, D, and A. B flat isn't quite so instantaneous, as the E and A pedals are both under the right foot, and they're 3 pedals apart. If they were side by side, the harpist might be able to change them both in one smooth motion, but in this case you'll have to change them one at a time. You might notice a certain trend in tuning. Because of the diatonic landscape, it's possible to turn every key from a full 7 notes to a pentatonic scale with 2 enharmonic changes. But the flat keys require sharpening of certain pitches, which is what it means when the diagram shows a box below the line, and the sharp keys require flattening of certain pitches, which is when the little box is above the line. This eventually gets all mixed together as you get to where the keys meet up in the middle of the circle of fifths, but it's still a quick and easy way to help you remember how to work out tunings for the more commonly used keys. I'll finish this tip by drawing your attention to some enharmonic tunings that take away yet one more pitch from the pentatonic to actually spell out 7th chords suitable for glissandos. It's easy to miss these in Cecil Forsyth's long rambling discourse about harps, but they're indispensable for harp scoring. Not every 7th chord is possible, but there are a few dominant 7th chords, all 3 possible diminished 7th chords depending on the position that you place them in, and a few half-diminished and minor 7th chords, which Forsyth calls parts of major ninths and parts of 11ths. You'll never know when these chords might prove useful in a gushing passage, and there are other chords available if you have time to work them out.